Hey, it's Dave Bauer.
And this is Brian Mertens, and you're listening to Rewilding Conversations.
So on the phone today, we have a wonderful opportunity. We have our first Rewilding Conversations guest, Christina Kahn, who is the publicist for Brandy Lane Publishing in Richmond, Virginia. This is a remarkable publishing house. They published my book, What's Under That Rock, Papa? And I have been gifted to be in a relationship with Christina and her associates. So I'm very excited to have her in on the call. So I'll let Christina and Brian say hello real soon. I just want to frame our conversation today. And for those listening in, we'll be talking about communication. Most importantly, how is human relationship most effectively built in communication in a non-digital format? And then secondarily, what has nature been doing for eons and eons of time that we could look back and see how nature connects, how organisms in nature connect to communicate effectively. So, Brian, how about over to you, just to let folks hear that lovely voice of yours, and then we'll introduce Christina and let her say a few words, and we'll begin.
Yeah, awesome. Well, it's always great to be here gathering with you, Dave, and nice to have a new voice on the line too. And yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting topic, just kind of looking at, communication and how we can communicate. Because the thing that I'm sort of have in the back of my mind as we're getting into this topic is that a lot of our listeners are doing, they're starting a school, or they're doing programs, they're running retreats. And one of the really core things when you're doing those sorts of things, when you want to have students and you want to mentor people in nature, is to actually get students to show up for your class. And, that's all about communication. How do you actually build a community of people that you can work with? And so, I think it's going to be really fun to dive into this. And I'll just pass it over to Christina.
Well, hi, guys. It's definitely a pleasure to be here chatting with you. Like Dave said, I work in publicity for a really small publisher, but we have a lot of spirit. We have a lot of books that we really get behind, and so much of that is making connections with people in the community, making connections with people all over the country. And for such a small publisher, it's really important for those connections to feel authentic and personal. So I hope I'll have some interesting things to say today.
So our time with Christina is a bit limited. She wears a number of hats with her publishing house. So we're gifted with her for about 20 minutes today. So we're going to put Christina on the front end here a little bit more than Brian and I, and I'll try to tease some valuable information from Christina. So, Christina, given the work you do, given the wisdom you have as a kind of a person that coaches authors in particular to build really good, vibrant relationships with their followers, can you talk about a couple of the techniques, behaviors that when an author demonstrates these kinds of behaviors, they translate into really energetic relationship building. And I'm just going to give it to you because I think you've got some great ideas to start our talk.
Sure. So a big part of being an author of an independent publisher, as you well know, Dave, is trying to get your books out there in the world. And so our authors do a lot of online and digital kind of connections, but one of the most valuable ways that they can kind of raise their brand awareness, so to speak, about their books and themselves is by just going places and talking to people, because there's a sense of enthusiasm and excitement that you can convey in person that really just doesn't translate digitally. People can see that you're excited about what you're talking about, and they get on the same level. Human emotions are kind of infectious this way, and so that's something that is really limited in the digital age. So a lot of new authors, when they're first trying to market their books, I tell them, take a copy of your book and go walk around downtown. See how many people you can get excited about this title.
Okay. So I'm writing down some key words: verbal, sound, acoustic. So voice, being present to them. There's another dimension that you touched on, meeting them. So you're physically present to them. Can you talk a little bit about when someone's physically present there and able to talk, what is it about the physical presence that adds a neat dimension? Because we can talk on the phone, we can talk on Google Hangout and Zoom and all these platforms that let our voices be transmitted. What is it about that physical presence of being present to the other human being?
Sure. Well, so you may not know this, Dave, but in college I majored in English linguistics, which is a scientific study of language, and it astounded me in my classwork how much time that we spent talking about body language. It's something you don't think about right off the bat when you're talking about language, the scientific study of language and communication, but over 50% of human-to-human kind of communication happens through body language. A lot of things get lost in translation, even over the phone, but especially over email and text message, just because you can't convey these subtleties that you do even without thinking about it when you're talking to someone one-on-one.
Please, go ahead. Go on.
I was going to say just all these subtleties that come across, all these minute movements in your face and the way you hold yourself convey a lot that people don't think about, but they notice when it's missing.
Wow. Yeah, we've heard it. Brian's heard it. I've heard it. The people listening in have heard it. And you're reminding us that the power of being physically present, because your body is physically there for them and theirs is physically there for you to interpret, adds a remarkable dimension of satisfaction.
Absolutely.
What's underneath this call is the sterility that we have grown so heavily to rely on in terms of our forms of communication. So what we're really at today with our conversation is how do we remove some of the lack of wisdom and the quantitative time we spend in these sterile forms of communication when already you've reminded us that the need to hear one another and the need to be present to one another in body is really very, very satisfying and valuable. So showing up at a book fair or a book sell, you're going to feel more satisfied and expose yourself to way more opportunities, which I have found as well, than if you're trying to push something out on Facebook or Instagram or something like that. So nice, very powerful, very nice. So let's push it laterally just a little bit now if we can, or invite you to go lateral just a little bit, Christina. Is there another dimension? Is there another human behavior that when you see it, when you know an author is doing it, or when you do it? I mean, speaking from the personal eye, when you do it, you find the relationship to thrive when you are able to use that quality. Is there anything else that arises from your world?
Kind of tying back into what I was saying about body language previously, I think there's so much to be said for just approaching everything, every interaction in your life, even when you're not trying to sell things, even when you're not trying to actively meet some end, is to just approach everything with a sense of kind of like cheerfulness and enthusiasm. That's something that really, if it's not someone's natural sort of setting, which of course there's people who run on a higher frequency than other people. It's one of those things where you just have to kind of remind yourself to do it. You fake it until you make it, until cheerfulness and excitement becomes kind of like your habit. And then you reach a place where you can carry that into everything you do, into your job and into your hobbies and into your relationships. And people want to be around cheerful people who bring them up. And I think that that's such an important part of making lasting connections, is being someone who brightens.
Yeah, because I have a sneaky feeling that the brain, and someone who knew a great deal about brain research would chime in and be able to points to the specific region of the brain. But there are some receptors in the brain that when someone is in front of them or when they are demonstrating enthusiasm, cheerfulness, lighthearted, playfulness,
Right.
that builds a dimension that invites a level of relationship building that just is not going to manifest in a digital form of communication.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so that quality of being present. Brian, let me just bring in over here. I'm curious, can you recall one time recently where you were a listener or you were a person you were with was really touching you because of the emotional way they were expressing themselves through cheerfulness or enthusiasm or excitement? Can you recall one specific time recently where you had that happening?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that immediately comes to mind, I have a friend called Steve, and we talked recently on the phone. It's been a while since we had a chance to connect, and he's just kind of got that kind of energy where he's just, he's just a happy person, and he's an excited person, and it really comes through in the conversation. So I do always find that even for myself, I bring that into a conversation. I have that intention to be in a good mindset, and that the feeling of our conversation will lift up both people. And I definitely find that when others come into the conversation with that same attitude, it's like it feeds back and forth, and I just feel like I feel so much more uplifted by those conversations. So is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, no, you hit it. And you mentioned a really powerful word that I'd like to invite Christina to maybe. Christina, he mentioned intention, and Brian and I have often used, and he recently used it in a podcast of his that I'm listening to that's just remarkable on coaching other folks interested in nature and mentoring.
Right.
So when you come with an intention, when you bring a type of intention into a relationship, I believe it acts as a remarkable catalyst. So, Christina, can you recall a time when neither you or someone close to you came into the relationship, or it was a mature relationship, and all of a sudden it was very clear that the intention was healthy and warm and safe and engaging and helpful, and you could tell there was an intention of helping each other out? What does that look and sound like in your world?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I apologize for continuing to use the same kind of references that I have been about the publishing world. But as someone who works in kind of, I don't want to say sales, but that is a lot of what I do, you have to approach people in a certain way. If you approach them in a salesy kind of way, we all have received these phone calls. We've all been approached by people who are trying to sell you something, and it feels kind of awkward. You don't want to engage, basically. But with our titles here, you have to approach people like you're trying to share this beautiful story with them. You're not trying to say, I want to sell you a book. It's, I want to share an important story with you that I think is going to make a difference in your life. And I think that when you approach it from that perspective of a person who has experienced this story that they want to share with another person, it really fosters an authentic sense of, togetherness, of coming together around this tale, this memoir, or this, children's book, to kind of share the feelings that you experienced when you read them. So it's a lot more personal that way.
Yeah, and just hearing you tell your story to remind us and the listeners of the need for that. If there's anxiety about being good enough, I remember one of the callers in Brian's recent podcast talking about having what she called her monkey mind and her inner critic so she didn't think she was good enough to do this nature and mindfulness work in the world. And Brian reminded her, and you're reminding us that, it's the intention you bring to the relationship that really will catalyze safety, warmth, and trust. And for marketing, man, if you can hit that trust thing, for starting a new program of nature mentoring, for engaging people in some novel new program that you're trying to launch, if you can really be real and authentic and present the true intention with it, you're going to do great. There's going to be something that we call flow in that on the early side. There won't be this distrust, mistrust. And I really hope that this podcast fosters a little more wisdom for everyone who listens to it on how do we restore trust and joy and helpfulness in the relationships that we have, because this can only help our world and our relationships with nature. And I think maybe we go to Brian, and Christina, you're going to have to cue us now when you need to depart, because I know we've only had you for a short time. But I thought, Brian, let's turn to the animal world just really lightly and briefly, and then we'll get into it much deeper in the second half of the call. But can you think of an example of an organism that you've witnessed or been near, where you could, it was the llama story. Tell the llama story, the light side of the llama story, about the woman that walked over to the fence, and the llama came up really, really quick and curious. Can you give a short rendition of that one? It's such a gifted example of an animal with its intention that fostered that relationship with that woman.
Yeah, sure. Christina, do you have time for this, or?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Well, essentially, you can find the recording on my website, and so anyone, if you're looking for this and you want to hear the actual story, because it'll come from her much better than me, because she experienced it. You can send me an email if you can't find it. Essentially she was out exploring this landscape, and it was a place it was like a farm. It had horses and it had llamas, and so she was walking along the edge of this fence, and this llama came over to her, and they just had this very close moment where to me, I think the thing that it brings up for me in relation to communication is just, really what you were saying, Christina, that there's so much that gets said that's beyond the actual words that people use. There's the facial expression, the sort of energy that they have about them, the way that they move their body, and all those sorts of things. They give subtle cues as to, do I trust this person? Can I trust this person? What is their intention? What are they feeling right now? And it was just it was a really interesting story about sharing that moment of closeness with an animal.
Yeah. So looking into the llama's eyes and pausing, getting so close to the animal where you could see its nose twitching like a rabbit, and just appreciating that and smiling with that, and then turning 90 degrees from the fence line. This woman turns 90 degrees because she hears a babbling brook nearby, and instantaneously the llama turns in the same direction as the woman. It's as if they're sharing the same space. It's as if there's some chemistry going on between them. And this is one of the gifts that I think nature can help us have again. It's this shared time where we get back in touch with ourselves, and we get back in touch with the world that has been a bit isolated from us because of our leap into modernity, where we've got internet, and we've got all these instruments and tools that the natural world and creatures like llamas don't have access to. So I'm smiling as I say it, but I hope our listeners, from some of the gifts that Christina's offered so far in our call, become really clear about the need and the value of being physically present to each other, to paying attention to the power and influence of body language, and then those qualities of cheerfulness and enthusiasm and intention, especially if you're trying to foster a new relationship, being genuine and being sincere and transparent will really help us to build healthy relationships with each other. So Christina, I think at this point, this might be a nice opportunity for you to say goodbye to our listeners, and maybe we'll have you back in again sometime soon when you have a little bit more time. So, any closing wishes or words for those that are hearing you?
Well, I thought it would just be interesting to mention that the reason I can't stay on this call very long is because I'm having an in-office meeting with our office staff. We're trying to plan an event, and that's something that can be done over email. It's something that can be done via phone call, but we're all going to sit together in one room and have a brainstorming session because we can kind of use each other's energy. We can have that kind of shared sense of enthusiasm, and we can get each other's gears going on a new level when we're all sitting in the same room sharing the same kind of focus and enthusiasm. So I thought that might be a neat way to kind of tie in my exit to the theme of the podcast here.
Well, beautifully done. Very eloquent. So we'll connect again very soon, and wishing you the very best. And thank you for the work you're doing in the world.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much. It's been a joy chatting with you today.
Yeah. Thanks, Christina.
All right. Talk to you later, guys.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, Brian. Why don't, given a little bit of what you've heard, take it for a little bit. I've got other things that I'm curious about as well, but your mind is equally curious. So, what comes up for you just organically that you'd like to touch on?
Yeah, well, the thing that I'm kind of thinking about, and that I wanted to just point out, is that even though Christina is talking about book publishing, and she works with authors, all of what she discussed is very applicable to educators, people who are starting schools or running retreats, or if you're doing a forest kindergarten. Obviously, it's all still very practical, and I really like that example of just taking your book and going downtown and introducing it to people and kind of sharing your enthusiasm and kind of having that challenge to just see how many people you can get enthusiastic about your book. And so, to an author, the book is like the thing that you're going to be getting people enthusiastic about. But if you imagine for, say a mentor, someone who's starting a program or a school, what is your book? What is the thing that you would want to get people enthusiastic about? And just start sharing that with people in an organic way, and just see how many people you can get inspired about what you're doing. And I think that would be a really great challenge. So I thought that was really cool.
So I'm going to leap into a little bit of research I did because I'm so excited about this topic. And there's a gentleman that many people on the call may have heard of before. He's a very, very famous naturalist, E.O. Wilson. And in 1975, E.O. Wilson gave us this nugget of wisdom, that animal communication is most classically defined. So I'm going to shift to animals now, as the action of or cue given by one organism, the sender, and being perceived by and thus alters the probable behavior of another organism, the receiver, in a fashion that adaptiveness to either one or both takes place. So we say signals are given among animals where some form of transmission occurs that affects the other organism. And this kind of adds a nice segue into the natural world for nature mentors. And I think it's really, it gives us a segue to a lens of being in nature. So for example, I stand in my backyard and I fill up my bird feeder, and then I step back a few paces and the birds return. And I begin to notice the behaviors within a species and across species. And it's just fascinating to see what emerges when one simply visually observes, when I'm visually observing the critters from such a close distance. And I guess one of the things we can gift our followers with, those of us that are working on nature mentoring, or those of us that are just curious about being in nature, is see if you can perceive your own perception of another organism that's in the natural world. And what does that look and feel like? What did that sound like? Does it have sound? Is there an acoustic quality to it? There may even be a chemical quality to it. The obvious example is you get close enough to a bouquet of wild flowers where there's an aroma all of a sudden that emerges. There's remarkable transmission of communication in the animal and plant kingdom. So Brian, over to you briefly, or not so briefly, but can you help us remember how either a particular species or just species in general, whether they be animal or plant, effectively has communicated? Because I think you mentioned one yesterday, and if I don't hear that one again, I'll mention it. But I want to hear from you in terms of what do you know? What do you know that they use for communication?
Yeah. Well, one of the things we were doing a little brainstorming session yesterday, just sort of to talk about what was going to be on the agenda today. And one of the things that we had mentioned as being like, one of the things that we wanted to hit on was looking at the attributes of effective connection. And so I did a little thinking on this, and the sort of, I came up with 4, and you might have more that you want to add to this, but these are the main ones that were sticking out to me. That when communication is really working effectively, it's personal. So as opposed to, and this is what Christina was talking about, rather than locking yourself in a cave and sending emails and hoping that people will respond. Actually go personal with it and get it to that level where you're out on the street, you're making real contact with people, and it doesn't have to actually be a street. I guess that's just a way of talking. It could be anywhere, and I think in the animal world, the one that really speaks to me on this is just, if you look at mammals, I think this is the one that you were talking about, Dave, and just how physical mammals are when they touch each other. Like if you look at like cats or dogs or voles, mice, really any species of mammal, it's like we're wired for physical touch. And this is not like a mind-blowing insight. It's sort of, we've known this for a very long time. There's even that thing where babies who don't get touched when they're like in infancy, they can actually die. And it's that very personal level of connection that I think in the animal world, the equivalent would be like physical touch, giving someone a hug, shaking their hand, patting them on the back, all these sorts of things. And it really is communication that's, again, it's not about the words that you're using, it's about that personal interaction. The next attribute of effective communication is that it's reciprocal. So it's not like a one-way thing where you're putting all your energy into it and you're not getting anything back. And likewise, that when someone's giving to you, you're not just taking and taking, and there's actually a flow of information back and forth that feels reciprocal. And a funny example of this one that I thought of from the animal world is crows. And crows are really interesting. Sometimes this doesn't happen everywhere, but I've heard a lot of stories about from people who started feeding crows, and the crows got to know them, got comfortable with being fed by them, and they started bringing back like shiny things like spoons and bottle caps and pennies, and so you give the crows something and they will actually bring back like shiny things. Tends to be the common theme, and it's just a really bizarre thing. Another one of the attributes of effective communication would be that it's non-judgmental. So I would look for, when I feel like I'm really in a good conversation with somebody, I feel like I'm totally free to just be myself, say whatever's on my mind, and that it's coming from an authentic place, and that I can let the other person just be themselves too. And, it's just kind of that thing where it's all about that trust and just being in, just a really good conversation. And it feels so much better than when you have a really tight agenda about what you want the other person to say or what you want to talk about, all that kind of stuff. The example from the animal kingdom would be like dogs and their owners. If you have a dog, and that dog loves you, that dog doesn't care how much money you make, doesn't care what kind of clothes you wear, it doesn't care how intelligent you are, or it doesn't care about any of that stuff. It just loves you, and it wants to spend time with you. And so it's got that aspect of non-judgment to it. And then well, I'll pass it to you, Dave, and just see where your thoughts are, and then there is one more that I could share if we want to do that.
No, stay on a roll. You're hitting it. I got notes. I'll talk about yours in a moment. Give me your last one. I'm intrigued. What's the fourth one? Hello. What is it?
The fourth one, the fourth attribute of effective communication, for me would be that it's a long-term thing. So it's not just a one-off thing where you talk to somebody once and then you never talk to them again. I really find that for the deepest relationships to develop, it has to be something that happens over a period of time where you come together, you connect, you bring your minds together, then you separate, you go and you do some stuff, and then you come back together again. And that's one of the things around my one of the things that I think works so well about my Instincts mentoring program is we do these calls every couple of weeks where we get together and we share stories, we share observations from what we've been seeing in nature, and I ask questions to help people figure out what the deeper message is there, so they can understand like birds and plants and trees and all that kind of stuff. And but the deep changes that I see happen over a period of months and years as opposed to like a period of days. So yeah, long term. And the example from this one is it's a little bit subtle, but I was watching some blue jays this morning out my window, and they were in a maple tree in my front yard, and there was maybe like 5, 6, or 7 of them that were in there. And I was just sort of noticing how even though I couldn't hear them, I couldn't actually hear the sounds that they were making, or if they were making sounds at all, there was a very obvious communication that was happening between them that was very subtle. And it was really another thing is like I can't see very well. I wear glasses, and so I couldn't really even see the detail of what they were doing. I just sort of noticed that one of them would kind of shake a little bit and hop, and then another one would kind of shake and hop, and there was this rhythm to their movement that could be seen, and it was like a big picture thing. Like they were all sort of interacting as this flock, and I could see how their awareness was being directed in certain directions, and when one of them would go down to feed, the others would be on lookout, and it was just this constant flow, and it just reminded me so much of the kind of communication that happens between people when they've known each other for 10, 20, 30 years, where you can be sitting around a dinner table and eating a meal and not really even talking, or maybe just having, very few words, and yet you can tell what the others are feeling. You can tell when somebody's going to start speaking. You can tell whether they had a good day or a bad day, if they're stressed out, if they're if they're feeling really good, and it's that sort of subtle level of you feel it almost before you don't really even have to think about it. It's just like I can just tell what that person is feeling because I almost feel it myself, and so I think that kind of really empathetic connection, it comes from very much from the long-term aspect of relationships. And so those are four that I thought of, and I'm sure there's more.
Well, those are great because sometimes less is more. So maybe one of the things we take away from, and maybe something our listeners take away from, in reviewing your four, communication is most effective when it's personal, when it's reciprocal, when there's a quality frequently of non-judgment, and when it's spread out over a long term, knowing it's going to be long term. This builds a level of satisfaction and safety and comfort that helps the human spirit thrive. And in the animal world, when you get out into nature and you visit, this is the whole idea of a sit spot. So when you get a sit spot going, and you revisit that physical location with frequency, you enter into a relationship with some of those creatures that you've seen before, and you can almost, with confidence, begin to know, I know you, I've seen you, and something happens to the human spirit when there's that replicable confidence that, I hope they show up today. I hope I hear that again today. I'll sit on my back porch in the warmer months, and I'll just wait for the distant sound of the orioles and the pine trees that are a little distance away. And when I'll hear them, they're not at the feeder yet. They're not at my oriole feeder, but I'll hear them. Oh, they're in the hood. They're in my area. And I'll sit there with some level of anticipation, and my hearing and my vision will get more acute. And then suddenly the male or the female will show up, and then I'll see what I've seen before. The male will, feed in a certain way, and the female almost always sits in a secondary role and won't trump anyway, I have to be careful of what political characters I mentioned. Won't push the male out. It's often the male gets the dominant feeding station, gets to go first, and the female sits so patiently. And I feel like jumping out there and say, hey, girl, step up and get to the feeder. He's got to finish all the food that's in there, So I have this playful relationship, and that happens because of the long-term and frequent relationship that I've developed with them.
Yeah.
So the gift is the sit spot. The gift is finding a time and a space that works for you in whatever nuance your world presents for you. So, those were great, Brian. Those were great. Let me just mention a few that I found to be valuable in the plant and animal world. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Having read a really gifted book from a gifted author, The Hidden Life of Trees, what I discovered is that I don't think I knew this, but now I'm hearing it more and more. I'm seeing it more and more, that the trees, through the microtubules that they have in the soils called hyphae, exude chemicals where they communicate with the young little seedlings that try to crop up. And what they have found is when the older trees exude certain kinds of plant hormones through their hyphae, the little ones thrive and do much better. And if there isn't enough of the older trees in the woods, the younger ones, they just don't flourish as well. They don't become so qualitatively rich and hardy. And who would have guessed that trees are communicating with each other in such subtle ways? And the same thing is true of the chemicals that they exude in their leaves. We now have the scientific sophistication to pick up these very subtle levels of plant hormones and plant scents that are being exuded. And they find that at certain times of the day, at certain times of the year, they're communicating with each other through chemical signals. So chemical signals happens to be one of the ones that I found that very frequently is used in nature. So there's a point of origin of the chemical substance. And the neat thing about chemical signals, it can be transmitted over a really long distance. So in the animal world, what do? Well, we've adapted that. We've taken the beautiful scents the flowers make, and both males and females on our planet use cologne and perfume. So, and what does that do? Well, that awakens a part of our brain that makes something a little more intriguing and inviting. So the whole aspect of chemical signals. You live with a person long enough, and you get to know their smell, and there's a comfort with their smell. When someone passes and they lose a loved one, you will often see they will pick up an object that the person used frequently, and they get satisfaction, joy, and comfort in smelling what that person's scent was. So to the degree we do that more frequently again, we'll be more satisfied. And this all arises from the relationship of the natural world. I think what I'm discovering in this conversation, and I'm so grateful that we're having it, is I was at a point in my life where I was beginning very recently to feel just a bit too isolated. Maybe it's a function of winter, even though I love cross-country skiing and being outdoors. But I think I was probably spending just a little bit too much time in the sterility of my office and my keyboard and the electronic transmission. So there was a hunger that was arising in me that I honored. And I said to Brian about a week or two ago, I want to do something on communication. And it took some time, and Brian was very patient and non-judgmental, and allowed me the opportunity to clarify, what is this, Dave? What are you trying to say? What's going on for you here? And this conversation today is really providing a great deal of satisfaction for me personally, because it's reminding me that when a relationship is best, it has certain qualities to it, of tactile, of chemical, of acoustic, of visual, that the animal and plant kingdom have demonstrated forever. And we too, as nature mentors, as people that are trying to help the world remember the need for being in nature, as we get real clear again on the satisfaction of those qualities in our day, we'll be happier, we'll be kinder, we'll be gentler, we'll need to take less from the planet, we'll be more willing to give back. And it may be significantly just a function of being an organic creature, of remembering our physicality and the joy we get from the natural world. So, Brian, I know a few thoughts have come up. Why don't we bring it back to you, and then we'll maybe consider wrapping this one up. I think it's been very exciting conversation. So what is it you'd like to put out here on the tail end of our talk?
Yeah, I think the main thing that I'm kind of feeling as we're wrapping up here is just just wanted to encourage folks to actually reflect for yourself. Like now that we've had all these conversations about communication and thinking about the different attributes, and to just take a minute and look at your own relationships and your own communication, and just sort of lightly consider, where do you see yourself already doing the attributes of effective connection? Where do you already see connection or communication? Sorry, I'm getting my words mixed up. Where do you see communication already working in your life? And then where do you see opportunities to grow? And and just look for ways to bring more personal communication into your life. And I think that would be sort of the main call to action that I'd like to leave with today.
Yeah. So please, folks that are listening, and lead well. Let that inner critic get a little quiet. Take some of the wisdom you've heard from Christina and myself and Brian, and step up and do one thing that really brings you joy and satisfaction that you've been sitting on, because the degree to which you demonstrate it as a potential nature mentor or a well-seasoned nature mentor or children's author or teacher or human being, the degree to which you step up and engage in any one of these qualities, the world will be a better place, and the natural world will be a better and safer place. So thank you for joining us today. Peeking a bit at anything that I'm doing, you can find my work at creativenotureplay.com. And I do hope that you'll listen to one or two of our other podcasts on the Rewilding Conversations Facebook podcast series. So, Brian, thank you for this gift of shared conversation today.